Hey YouTube, Petey Twofinger here with something different for this channel. Today's video is a book review, Jack Kerouac, On the Road. I'm not a reader. Um, that's one of those things where I read a lot online. I read a lot of more technical stuff, more stuff relating to music technology. Uh, but really, as far as novels and that type of stuff go, my family, my mom and my brother have read all of the James Bond novels. They've read all of the Tolkien. They've read all of these classic books. I've read a handful of books in my life. I've read my favorite stuff is very minimal. I'll say the books that I enjoyed reading were My Side of the Mountain. It's a kid's book, but it's a decent read. It's a decent length. Kind of a loner story, which I can relate to that. The other book that I really, really loved was Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I feel that Kesey was working with the CIA to spread LSD in context with this Illuminati type of plan through the Tavistock Institute and what we see happening in Laurel Canyon. There was this world movement of the hippie generation, rock music, teen power, LSD, free love. All of this stuff was engineered to break down the nuclear family, remove the father, remove the church, break up the family, institute the state as the patriarchy. And as we see time progressing, this is just kind of the plan. It's get everybody chipped, one world currency, and the tools in which they use to go from the stuffy family values of a mother and a father with the three children family and the church, the Sunday school, that type of thing, to putting the state in charge and removing our weapons so we kind of can't, to kind of eliminate any type of pushback when they roll out the big plans for change, which we are going to be seeing, especially as we approach 2020 and 2030. There is a lot of stuff uh, relating to global warming and politics that's coming down the pike that we're just starting to see that popping up even in reference to pop culture. We see the latest King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, the subject of their album, kind of spreading this message that the planet is in fact dying right now. We need to act or it's all over. So I'm not here to discuss the political ramifications of either side, fight, yell, and scream, and argue about who's right or who's wrong. I'm merely an observer looking at these trends, looking at what I have been taught since I was a child as far as future predictions in the Bible and then reality, what's really happening in my world. And then with the boom of the internet and freedom of information, we see access to these conspiracy theories, and when you look into it, they really have a lot of evidence. It's not to say that I believe that they replaced Paul McCartney and we never walked on the moon. It's just to say I keep an open mind and I'm really entertained by watching this type of content. Now, back to a factual representation of this type of thing, we have Jack Kerouac's classic piece of American literature, On the Road. This is a book that people who come from this insulated, daddy brings home the bacon and you behave so you can get a job like daddy, and that's the end of the story. You're going to be going to church on Sunday. You know where you're going to be Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, punching that clock and that good job, so you can afford that honeymoon in Barbados and that timeshare in Florida. this type of prefab American security, the American dream that we're offered. Um, these children will read this book. It's part of your prescribed what you're supposed to read. Oftentimes in English lit classes, and as a junior or senior in high school, this book is handed out along with books such as The Catcher in the Rye and Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. These are excellent, excellent alternative American masterpieces. They don't necessarily jive with the Bible or the Bible Belt or any of the teachings you would find in a church. It's just the opposite. So we see this character, Jack Kerouac. He is a Catholic born guy. I'm guessing there was no father in the picture. He lived on the east. He lived on the east side of New York, probably Long Island or something, rich area where he would venture in on the weekends, maybe once a month for relations with women, and then he would head right back into his writing thing. This book deals with his alter ego, his best friend, who is a character in real life known as Neil Cassidy, who's a member of the Merry Pranksters. These are the people we see who start out on the West Coast with the LSD and bring it across the country in the novel The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test. They ended up at Millbrook, which was an estate, a mansion that was ruled by Timothy Leary, acid guru Timothy Leary, where high society, highfalutin types would, actors, movie stars, rich people, people who were the sons of, the DuPont Corporation, whatever. This actually was given to Leary. He had to pay $500 a month rent by a bigwig, a kid who was a trust fund kid. His dad owned Nabisco or some kind of, liquid paper air, some kind of American success story. And what went on at Millbrook was LSD. And Grateful Dead showed up there. Pretty much everybody showed up there. But quite honestly, this story begins on the West Coast with Ken Kesey documenting as he was lured into this test at a mental institution, and he was supposedly stole a key and let himself in and stole a bunch of LSD. Well, I'm not buying that. My mind plays a story out that it was a CIA operation. He was a CIA operative, and he was given mass quantities of LSD to drive across the country on a mission, doing this acid test as they did. They started doing it in San Francisco. They drove across the country giving acid to everybody they saw. They were pulled over by police. The police said, "What's in this cooler?" They said, "Orange juice." Police took a drink, put it back in, got back on their motorcycles, and must have been a fine afternoon for those boys. They ended up at Millbrook with this tons of LSD to meet with exiled Timothy Leary, who later was arrested with a couple of joints and imprisoned, broken out by the Black Panthers, exiled to South Africa, and then he quickly realized he wasn't down with them, as immediately they cast aspersions on him as being nothing more than a rich white boy drug fiend. So all of these characters have incredibly interesting lives and interesting stories. The story of On the Road is, we have the 50s. It came out in 57, so it's these two guys. We have the one freewheeling man, macho man, big talker, can get any girl, but he's a tender soul. He's not a violent type of guy. He doesn't speak with his fists. He's more of a pure soul, more of an artistic spirit, but at the same time, he's just kind of a bum. And he goes from town to town seeking the comfort of taken women. This is a guy who feeds, he's a predator, and he feeds off of unhappy married women, women who are kind of not the best moral they will cheat on their boyfriend. You run into, if you're in any kind of social scene, you will run into these types of women. Me and my upbringing, I was just aware of, I did not want to get involved. Okay. So there was all these opportunities that I had coming up as a musician. I wasn't an ugly guy. I was I could speak fluently, and I carried myself well, and I had more of a philosophical way of looking at life, love, spirituality, and right and wrong, where I did not want to get involved. It wasn't worth it for me to have a fling with some girl if she was going out with another guy. It wasn't worth it for me to get involved with a girl if she came after me real strongly and I knew she had just a ton of other partners. And when I did ever give in to those and that indulgence, it always ended up in heartbreak. So looking at these other types of guys who are just going out and preying on these types of women is not me. It's not my style. And this is kind of one of the things about the book that is a little bit of a downer for me. Where reading the book, I'm going to tell you right now, I really do recommend the book, but it's a controversial type of, the people that are in the book are not the best type of people. All of the people in the book. There really isn't any likable, wholesome character in the book. We see the whole ups and downs of this type of lifestyle where they're on the road and they're experiencing all this intense conversation, love affairs, jazz music, driving across the country on the seat of their pants with no money for gas, picking up hitchhikers, stealing gas, and then running into stuff like dirty cops, prostitutes, musicians, dope fiends, all the colorful characters that they read. And then there'll be moments where they're separated. It's the main character is not with this Dean Moriarty, and he is just unbelievably depressed. Everything screeches to a halt. So the book has that kind of up and down thing, leading up until I don't want to spoil the end of the book, but in the real life situation between these guys, from what I understand, Neil Cassidy did not speak to Jack Kerouac for a year and a half after the book came out, but then he eventually fell into that role, embraced it, and that's what killed him. Kerouac turned into a bloated, angry old alcoholic who was part of the scene that birthed the hippie generation. This was 57, the book came out, and like I was saying, it's responsible for a ton of kids reading this book and getting exposed to dope, sex, loose women, the thrill of being on the road, the way that this guy can write, it's poetry. It's beautiful the way that he describes things. And as an adult, someone who was raised kind of in that type of religious home, being warned about all this stuff and that Armageddon is coming, the Russians are going to invade, take our Bible, and we're going to be beheaded. It's all going to happen tomorrow, living in all this fear. I really admired this type of lifestyle as a young person, but as an adult, I can also tell you where that leads. This type of rampant abandon of any type of care will lead to addiction, venereal disease, and sorrow. That's if you just go balls out and you go, I want to drink every drink and do every drug and screw every woman that'll screw me, you're going to end up in a world of hurt. It just doesn't work like that. And that's kind of part of the spirit of the road. It's just going out and going after it. And there's a lot of people that read this book that it inspired them to attempt this type of vagabond gypsy lifestyle in hitchhiking, promiscuous sex, experimenting with drugs. And it's interesting how the book handles the drug use. It's never like, then we smoked a bunch of weed. It's always like they're staying at someone's house who's a doper, and occasionally it will be mentioned that they will be in the bathroom doing their afternoon fix. Marijuana is called tea, and it's not really ever, they aren't smoking it, but if you kind of put two and two together, that they're staying up for 3 days at a pop and they can't stop talking to each other, they're driving across the country in 18 and a half hours, that there's probably some Benzedrine involved. Meaning that the way that this book found its way into the classic market was It's really kind of 10-foot pole approach to drugs and alcohol. The book is very misogynistic. Any woman that has more than one partner is a whore. But the main character is out screwing everything that moves. He's married. He's got a kid. He's going after this one that's married and has a kid. He's never happy, and just like kind of never ending, running their mouths type of Grateful Dead, Jewish New York hippie style of homemade philosophers. This is the soup du jour that is On the Road by Kerouac. So it's kind of one of those things that you gotta detach yourself when you read it. Sometimes you gotta slow down and try to digest what he's getting at, because his prose style is unique and he's got a very artistic way of handling his pen. Other times it reads like water running down a mountainside. You could just blast through pages of this book as the time flies. But it is very dated in the sense that it's written from this perspective of the 50s. So it doesn't age well. If you were like a modern woman, if you were like a feminist, this is not the book for you to read. If you're an open-minded person who's fascinated by things like the hippie generation, or you don't know about the beatnik generation and you got an open mind, you're going to love reading On the Road. It's a wonderful book. It's just that I've got some moral, the cement that is my foundation, the stuff that comes from my birth, my concepts of spirituality and right and wrong tell me a lot of the things that I'm reading in this book are throwing up alarm flags as I'm reading it, that this is wrong. But then again, if I were to write down a book about what I was doing from the time when I was 16 to 21, the same thing would be happening. You know, I lost my father when I was 15. I come from a family of three boys, from brilliant parents, and my mom was really religious, and she kind of lost it. My brother was gone. He lost it, got into all kinds of trouble, and love affair with cocaine. He was gone at the time, and I was struggling through the loss of my father and basically the loss of my mother too, as she kind of completely went nuts and was flipping out because here I am choosing the wrong path right when she's lost her husband for the same thing. She felt that God took him from the earth because he didn't really throw himself into that living for Christ or the Lord, and paid the ultimate price at the age of 43. And of course, all that came back out and was released onto me as I was just maturing and rebelling, finding my own path through music. And she didn't want to have any part of that. So my story of redemption comes many years later, playing bass at a church that's just about a mile away from the church where I lost my fingertips. And I had that reconnection with my mother where she treated me like I was her son again for the 3 years that I did participate on that worship team. But that's my story. On the Road is incredibly well written. It's an inspired book. It's a true story where the names have been changed. And it tells a kind of a seedy tale. It's a bit watercolored. Some of the rough edges are taken off. And it's written by this brilliant man who is known as one of the fathers, the forefathers of the hippie generation, one of the rock stars of the late 50s, or the beat generation. We see Kerouac, Ginsberg. There were a bunch of other characters all around that worked in through the 60s, worked with protesting and all that. So I'm going to give the book a double thumbs up, but at the same time, it's a very complicated story, and it reflects a huge part of who we are as a society, who we are as Americans. And that's what I feel what makes it special, is it's a true story. And if you find that type of stuff interesting and you're looking for something new to read, well, I'm going to go ahead and recommend you check out One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is the better book. That's going to be your favorite. If you've never read it, Catcher in the Rye, you can skip that one. I'm Petey Twofinger. This has been my first book review. Maybe I'll come back and do one for My Side of the Mountain, the kids' book that really made an impression on me. I love you guys.